Imagine walking through your city one ordinary morning, only to discover that no one understands a single word you say. Friends stare at you in confusion. Strangers argue without reason. Within moments, an entire civilization begins to unravel. But how could something so unimaginable happen? Parents desperately try to comfort their children. Merchants struggle to serve their customers, and lifelong friends suddenly sound like complete strangers. Fear spreads faster than anyone can explain, because every familiar voice has become a mystery overnight. The confusion quickly turns into chaos. Workers shout louder, believing their voices simply aren't being heard. But the problem isn't volume, it's language itself. No matter how hard they try, every conversation ends in frustration. Towering above the frightened crowds stands an unfinished monument, unlike anything the world has ever seen. Once it represented hope, ambition, and human achievement. Now it silently watches as the city beneath it falls into complete disorder. How could the greatest construction project in history become the center of humanity's greatest disaster? To answer that question, we must travel back to a time after the Great Flood, when the world was beginning anew. After the waters of the flood finally receded, Noah's family stepped into a fresh beginning. The earth was quiet once more, and generation after generation, his descendants multiplied. Hope filled the hearts of mankind as they looked toward a future full of endless possibilities. Unlike today, every person on Earth shared exactly the same language. Communication was effortless, ideas traveled freely, cooperation came naturally, and people accomplished remarkable things simply because they understood one another perfectly. As families grew larger, villages expanded into busy towns. Farmers, builders, craftsmen, and shepherds worked side by side, creating thriving communities. Their unity became their greatest strength, and with every success, their confidence continued to grow. Eventually, many of Noah's descendants settled together in the broad plain of Shinar. Instead of spreading across the earth as God had instructed, they chose to remain together, believing their future would be stronger if everyone stayed in one place. Among the people, a bold idea began to take shape. If they worked together, they believed nothing would be impossible. Their leaders proposed building not only a magnificent city, but also a tower so extraordinary that future generations would remember their greatness forever. The people discovered a new way to build. Instead of relying on natural stone, they carefully shaped clay into bricks and baked them in blazing kilns until they became incredibly strong. It was an innovation that would allow them to build higher than ever before. Day and night, the furnaces glowed with fire as thousands of bricks were prepared for the enormous project ahead. The city buzzed with excitement, and everyone believed they were about to accomplish something the world had never seen. Yet hidden beneath their enthusiasm was a dangerous seed. With thousands of bricks ready, construction finally began. Workers poured onto the site from every corner of the city, each carrying tools, timber, and stone. What started as a simple foundation quickly became the largest building project humanity had ever attempted. Every sunrise brought more workers, more materials, and greater determination. The sound of hammers echoed across the plain from dawn until dusk. Day after day, the tower climbed higher, becoming a powerful symbol of what people believed they could accomplish together. The leaders walked among the builders with confidence, praising their progress and inspiring everyone to work even harder. The people no longer dreamed of simply building a city. They dreamed of making a name for themselves that would never be forgotten. As the months passed, the tower grew so tall that travelers could see it from many miles away. Families stopped to admire its enormous walls, while children pointed toward the sky in amazement. The people believed they were witnessing the birth of something eternal. Every completed level filled the city with celebration. Music echoed through the streets. Merchants prospered, and workers proudly told stories of their achievements. Their confidence continued to grow, but so did something far more dangerous: human pride. Instead of thanking God for the wisdom and strength they had received, many began believing that their success belonged entirely to themselves. Little by little, admiration turned into arrogance, and humility quietly disappeared from their hearts. The tower dominated the skyline like no structure before it. Looking upward, the people imagined that nothing could stop them. If they could build this monument together, they believed there was no limit to what humanity could achieve on its own. Yet while the people celebrated below, heaven saw something very different. God looked beyond the bricks and the stone. He saw hearts becoming consumed by pride, ambition replacing obedience, and a united people beginning to trust themselves more than their Creator. The scriptures tell us that the whole earth shared one language and one purpose. Together, the people possessed extraordinary potential. God knew that if their pride continued unchecked, nothing they imagined would seem impossible to them. Then came a moment that would change the course of human history forever. Without warning, the unity that had fueled the great tower was about to disappear. Not through war, not through disaster, but through something no one expected. Workers reached for another brick and called to their friends as they had done countless times before. But this time, the reply sounded completely unfamiliar. The words made no sense at all. At first they laughed, thinking it was a joke. Within seconds, the laughter faded. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The workers continued lifting bricks. Builders climbed the towering scaffolds, and the city buzzed with its familiar rhythm. Then, in a single instant, God acted. Without thunder or earthquake, he touched the very thing that united humanity, their language. A foreman shouted a simple command to his workers, expecting them to continue building. Instead, confused faces turned toward him. They heard the sound of his voice, but the words themselves had become completely meaningless. Silence lasted only a heartbeat before panic swept across the construction site. Everywhere they looked, the same mystery unfolded. Friends who had worked together for years suddenly spoke as though they had come from distant lands. The familiar language that had united an entire civilization had vanished, replaced by dozens of voices no one could understand. Families gathered together, desperately trying to understand one another. Parents reached for their children. Brothers called to their sisters. Husbands and wives repeated the same words over and over again, hoping something would make sense. But every attempt only deepened their fear. The carefully organized construction site quickly descended into complete confusion. Builders carried materials to the wrong places. Instructions were misunderstood. Teams that had once worked with perfect precision could no longer complete even the simplest task together. Frustration soon replaced confusion. Voices grew louder, hands pointed in every direction, and arguments broke out across the city. The people believed someone else had changed, but in truth, every language around them had been transformed. Within hours, the impossible became undeniable. The massive project that had united thousands of people simply could not continue. Without communication, every plan collapsed. The tower that had once symbolized mankind's greatest ambition now stood frozen in silence. One by one, the workers laid down their tools. The sound of hammers faded. The furnaces stopped burning. Dust settled over unfinished walls that would never be completed. For the first time in years, the construction site became eerily quiet. People naturally gathered with those whose words they could still understand. Small groups formed across the city, each speaking a different language. The unity that had once made them so powerful disappeared almost overnight, replaced by separation and uncertainty. Soon these groups realized they could no longer remain together. One after another, families packed their belongings, gathered their animals, and prepared to leave the only home many of them had ever known. The city that had dreamed of lasting forever was slowly emptying. Some journeys led toward distant mountains. Others crossed rivers, deserts, and open plains. As each group traveled farther from Babel, they carried with them new languages, new customs, and the beginning of entirely new civilizations. As the city emptied, countless families began long journeys into lands they had never seen before. Guided only by those who still spoke the same language, they left behind the place they once called home, carrying little more than hope, memories, and the desire to begin again. Some groups followed rivers toward fertile valleys. Others crossed mountains, deserts, and distant plains. Although they no longer understood one another, each journey became the beginning of a unique people, with its own language, traditions, and future. Far from Babel, new settlements slowly appeared. Simple homes became villages, villages became towns, and over many generations, these communities grew into nations. Humanity was now spreading across the earth exactly as God had intended from the very beginning. As years turned into decades, the once mighty Tower of Babel was abandoned. The sound of busy workers was replaced by silence. Wind swept through unfinished walls, and the great monument that was meant to glorify mankind slowly began to fade into history. Nature patiently reclaimed what human pride had left behind. Rain, Wind and time wore away the bricks that people once believed would stand forever. The tower remained, not as a symbol of greatness, but as a lasting reminder of misplaced ambition. Meanwhile, life continued across the world. Different languages shaped different cultures. New customs emerged, new communities flourished, and every nation carried its own unique story. Though separated by speech, every people shared the same Creator watching over them. The Bible tells us that the place was called Babel because there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth. What appeared to be a punishment was also an act of mercy, preventing humanity's pride from leading them even farther away from God's purpose. The story of Babel is not really about bricks or towers. It is about the human heart. Whenever people place their own glory above God, even the greatest achievements can collapse. True strength has never come from human pride, but from humble obedience. Even today, thousands of languages are spoken around the world. Every nation has its own history, its own culture, and its own traditions. Yet all of them can trace their origins back to the same family that survived the Great Flood with Noah. The ruins of ancient civilizations remind us that no kingdom built by human hands lasts forever. Wealth fades, monuments crumble, and even the greatest empires disappear. But God's plans continue through every generation, untouched by the passing of time. The people of Babel wanted to make a great name for themselves. Instead, history remembers them for a very different reason. Their unfinished tower became one of the Bible's most powerful lessons about humility, obedience, and the limits of human ambition. Perhaps the greatest question this story leaves us with is not how high the tower reached, but how easily pride can grow within every human heart. The Tower of Babel is more than ancient history. It is a timeless warning that still speaks. Thousands of years have passed since the Tower of Babel was left unfinished, yet its message remains as relevant as ever. God scattered the nations across the earth, but His purpose for humanity never changed. The story reminds us that while pride divides, humility draws us closer to God and to one another. If you enjoyed this journey through the Bible, don't forget to subscribe for more timeless stories that continue to inspire millions around the world.